David Charalambous, thank you so much for joining me today. This is a real pleasure. It really is. We spoke last week and we started getting into it. Big regretful I didn't hit the record button. We were just having a private conversation. But you're really, what you do is really in depth. Now, can you explain what is it that you do and how is it that you've become here? Because I watched your presentation last June in Victoria and I'm just mind blown. So explain.
Well, it goes back pretty much 25 years. So I've been studying perception, psychology, and for the last 5 years, behavioral science. Really, that question is, why do we do what we do? Why do we think the way that we think? And something very bizarre happened in March 2020 because I considered myself very experienced in the field and I considered that I could debate really well. And all of a sudden, talking to people just went crazy. You couldn't reason with people. And I was like, whoa, something's happened here. So then I pretty much, and how serious what was going on, I pretty much created a project called Reaching People and locked myself away and pretty much went through all the research, all the latest books. And what it was about understanding all the concepts of about how they've mapped out how we work, creating little pieces of the jigsaw and then putting those pieces together. So then we've got a picture of how people are functioning. And it's been like super rewarding to understand myself better. But then to watch how the world is working, it has been really surreal. And then there was just a really intense need to share that with people because people are having opinions and concepts and they're not realizing that someone's been hacking their mind, you know, in so many different ways.
So this is crazy. So the reason why I got in touch with you at this timing is Canada's going through another one of these things. And I feel like it's a mass formation psychosis of some sort of type. And immediately as I saw it happening, your presentation came to mind. And I was like, okay, I got to get in touch. Is this what's happening now? Because because of, well, Trump derangement syndrome. We all know what that is, TDS. Well, it's hit Canada very hard. And it's because of a series of tariffs that Donald Trump has put on. And it's caused this new trade war that our politicians are gleefully engaging in because it's brought them a reason to bring new fervor to their cause or to their party or to their brand and all of this. And it really is reminiscent of the COVID era. I mean, we've gotten to the point where they're covering alcohol bottles in the liquor stores that are American made, just to tell people that they can't purchase these items. People are getting angry at Americans. People are, I've heard reports of people trying to force Teslas off the road because they don't like Elon Musk. This kind of thing. It's really like, it's beyond the pale. It's not normal behavior. And I wanted to get to the bottom of this. So let's just dive in. What causes people to do this? How do people become so fervent like this?
Well, it's really well understood how people congregate into groups and how then this sort of discrimination will happen. And it was Henry Tajfel in the UK studied this after the Second World War. And he's like, well, what makes people congregate into groups and then compare themselves to other groups and then basically do some horrendous things as well? Yeah. So they were looking at, is it culture? Is it racism? Is it any of these things? And it turned out that it actually doesn't matter. All it needs is a name. So all you need to do is create a group, give that group a label, then have people identify with one of the groups and then compare the two groups. That's all you need. That's it could be eye color. In a classroom, one teacher, she says, because they were obviously experiment with this to explain to the children. And she says to them one day, she says, oh, by the way, we've got all the latest research. It turns out that everyone with blue eyes is more intelligent than brown eyes. So then what you had, these two groups formed, and then the blue eye people were looking down on the brown eye people, and, sort of conflict and all these things start to occur. And then they come in the next day and she says, oh, sorry, I got it wrong. It's actually the brown eyed people are more intelligent than the blue eye. So, and then the same thing happened. It flipped. Now, people don't realize that we're very tribal. I mean, a lot of people realize you've only got to take any sport in any country and take two major teams,
Mm-hmm.
and then you'll have people literally disliking another person just because of the team they support. And then it'll be, and then the comparison comes in. So first it's label, then it's identity, and then it's the comparison. Oh, you're an idiot. Okay. So if you notice how you'll talk to someone, and if you hold an opinion contrary to what they're telling you on the media, then suddenly it's like, oh, you're an idiot. And it's so crazy. And of course, my response to that is say, may I ask how you came to that conclusion? Because
right.
what you're there, it's actually a really important question, because what you're doing is, if you say why, by the way, in this context, why is a question you never really want to ask someone, because the reason is they actually don't know why they're responding the way they do. So if you ask them why, all they're going to do is rationalize, and they're going to give you the buffet of excuses that the media will provide for you. So why is never a good question. If you ask them to explain their reasoning, they can't, because in fact they don't know, because it's a house of cards. It's not built on any foundation. And this is why everyone, it's like how you get angry mobs. I mean, do you remember the conference we was at where we met? You remember the protesters, and people would ask them, why are you here? And they said, they're spreading hate. So what did they say? Oh, I don't know. They've just told me.
Yeah, no idea.
It's like, well, if you don't know, how do you know it's hate?
Well, the fascinating thing that you talked to me when we were having a private conversation just last week is you told me that when people they have a belief system, and sometimes it's not structured, it's not built with rational reasoning, but then when it's challenged, this is the tool, this is the time that those belief structures actually get solidified when somebody challenges it. So then they have to rationalize. Yes. And once they've rationalized it, now the belief structure has a rationale behind it. It didn't before. Yeah. They were just randomly believing it because of some outside stimuli. And that more intelligent people have better tools at indoctrinating themselves, essentially.
Yeah, they're more flexible in their rationalization. So the way it works is that we're not educated to understand how our brain functions, how we operate as an organism. And like Daniel Kahneman won a Nobel Prize for this, and he wrote a book called Thinking Fast and Slow, and I'm sure a lot of the viewers have read it or know of it. But there's so many different books of that ilk, and what it is really is that if we've got a piece of information that's coded from the sort of irrational part, so basically if we've been drummed into fear and then we make a decision from fear, sometimes it can be irrational. And it can be plugged into the system. Like you look at, I think it was Steve Jobs had a fear of buttons. Okay. Literally.
You really had it.
That is a thing. So there's many different phobias that to a lot of people doesn't make any sense. So the person, it also doesn't make any sense. But because they got such an intense fear, what happens is that we reason, and we try to reason emotional responses. Okay. So an emotional response won't be rational. I mean, it will be survival instinct. So, if there's a snake coming along, and so if a car drives, let's say you're in a country and they drive on the opposite side of the road and you don't realize, and you go to step in the road, car comes and you jump back. Okay. People will go, oh, I saw the car and jump back. No, you automatically jump back before you realize what was going on. And then you try to rationalize what happened. That makes sense. So right. A big part of our system is an automatic response from the emotional. It's automated. So if I went to shake your hand, you wouldn't go, oh, he's raised his hand, I'm going to raise my hand, I'm going to move it forward. It's automatic. So what happens is that when processes get automated, consciousness drops out because it's not needed anymore. And that is a very efficient way to operate as a human being. The problem is when that idea has not had consciousness to assess it, and it's wrong. So then the person's automatically responding to what you say, but they don't realize. That makes sense. So you might go, oh, have you seen this? And they go, oh, you're a conspiracy theorist. Okay. Now that's been drummed in by repetition by the media, because saying if anyone talks about this subject, conspiracy theory, this subject, conspiracy theory, this subject. So then in their unconscious mind, that makes sense, they've automated it. So then what you're doing is you're triggering this automatic response. Now, the mistake that a lot of people make is that when they're called a conspiracy theorist, and by the way, it's not easy to not get angry because the person's being completely irrational and they're calling you names for, sharing what usually is a complete fact, but they're not conscious. So that's the thing. They're completely unconscious. So they call you that. And of course, then if we respond with anger, then you just end up. So we have a saying on the project, which is don't step in the ring. Now, yeah, it's mighty tempting to step in the ring, and by all means, you're welcome to do so if the person's, you know, been a complete arse, but you won't get anywhere. That makes sense. All you can do is argue with them, and you know, and it's just, and what was it? There was one quote that says, you know, don't argue with stupid people because from a distance they won't know who's the stupid one. So not stepping in the ring is really, really important. So what we're dealing with is really, and they've taken conditioning, which people call it brainwashing, but I think conditioning is a better word, because brainwashing is that you're clearing the stuff away, which is what usually happens prior to the conditioning. So conditioning is really to create an association between two things to create an automatic response. That makes sense? So when you're talking to someone, they're responding, they are under the illusion that what they're responding with has substance to it. Okay.
Right.
And that's called basically they're responding from what's known as an IOED. And I won't talk about the complex term, but it's basically from an illusion. They're responding from an illusionary position. They think they've got the substance to their claim. And when you ask them, then they're going to hit cognitive dissonance. That's why it's really important to ask them in a friendly way if you can, you know, contain yourself and not get angry if they're not being a complete arse.
Right. But then it's hard not to have your own, triggered responses.
Well, that's such a key thing. Exactly. But you see, that's also been conditioned into us.
Right.
Okay. So
because this is the thing. People are probably viewing into this, not only, curious about how their fellow citizens are so whacked out, but how do I avoid this happening to me? How do I avoid this happening to my children? How do I avoid this happening to my loved ones? Right.
Well, we got a whole series of exercises that can decondition these automatic responses, and I've spent a lot of time on myself to do that. So I can have a conversation with someone now, and they can call me all sorts of names, and it's really water off a duck's back. That's not something that it's easy. You can't just decide to do that. So I could decide like, oh, I can lift 30K in a bench press or whatever, but until I build myself up, I can't do that. So that's why we use a lot of exercises, because what's happened is that it's literally the perfect strategy for, divide and conquer. That's it. You get two people to step in a ring and they're never going to listen to each other. So there's no information exchanged. And what's really interesting is that it's almost, if you took the US, for instance, it's almost, from what I can see, like 45-45 each side of the main parties. And then you've got the 10% which swings whoever's going to come in.
Yeah.
Now, that 45 and that 45, they will. Have you ever seen two politicians where the other one goes, oh, actually, that guy's correct. The other guy's got a point. Think about it. It's absolutely insane, isn't it? If you've got two intelligent people, well, supposedly intelligent people, shouldn't they agree on something? And this is what was interesting about the whatever happened the last 5 years, is that they agreed on a lot of things for once in their lives, basically because they're both being, funded by the same sources. But this is the key. Like, it's the amount of decisions that people make due to the party that they affiliate with or the person that's at the top of their group is incredible. You talk to, like, I was talking to someone on social media a few weeks ago who is an acquaintance, the most delusional person I think I've ever spoke to, like complete Labour supporter in the UK. So he's blaming the Conservatives for everything. And Labour here, I mean, Starmer is, you've probably seen bits and bobs.
He's a piece of work, yeah.
Yeah. He's literally renegaded on every single promise when he got in. And this guy's trying to defend him. It's like, surely it's undefendable, but it's not when they're so conditioned to support the group. It's so tribal. It's so ingrained.
Well, we see the same stuff here in Canada. I mean, liberals are trying to change, or they're trying to give out this new impression of who they are as Trudeau has stepped down, and they have a new leader, Mark Carney, who I'm sure you're familiar with in the UK, right? But so he's up there, and they have this task of trying to convince Canada that they're an entirely new party, but it's all the same players. I mean, Carney was a he was an advisor to Justin Trudeau, and the rest of them are all still there, and the cabinet's the same people. But yet somehow
new and improved recipe.
Somehow everyone's eating the same gruel, but they just give it a stir. That's all they did.
Well, this is the thing about tribes. Like once people get attached to that group, it really doesn't matter what they do. They're going to view it. So you think about your favorite sports team versus another team. Not many people watch the game objectively. Okay.
No, never.
And that's what you're saying, especially when emotion's involved. And that's why so much of the propaganda is through an emotional lens, because it will make someone irrational. I mean, some of the things people come up with, I mean, that gentleman I was mentioning about, I started talking to him and then he goes, "Oh, you flat earther." And I'm like, go through every one of my social media channels. You will not see a single post about the shape of the earth. Like, it's not my field and it's not something I would even comment on, but that was his media go-to. And I'm like, dude, like, what are you doing? Like it's got, but you can see where that all comes from, because what the media does a very good job at is they create this caricature of anyone that challenges the narrative. Okay. And then what happens is, if you say anything against narrative, they respond emotionally, but then they will also go, well, they're a critical thinker. You can't buy everything and be a critical thinker. It's like one or the other, like, you know what I mean? And a combination, really. But this is what's so incredible, because they are told that they're critical thinkers, or they like to think so. I mean, if you ask anyone, are they open-minded, you're going to get 99% of people say yes. It's just one of those things. You know, saying you're a critical thinker doesn't make you a critical thinker.
No, I always respond to that with, I hope I am. I try. At least I try to do that.
It's a process, isn't it? That's the thing. It's a process where you take a piece of information, and it's not that we're a critical thinker or not. It's, are we critically thinking? So there's times where, for instance, there's times where I don't critically think, because and we all do it a lot of time. We take shortcuts. So if I'm on holiday, say in Spain, and I walk past two restaurants and one of them's busy and the other one's empty, my shortcut in my mind is going to go, well, the busy one must be the better restaurant, okay? Because people in there. Now, that's a general heuristic that most of the population will have. Some people don't like busy restaurants, so they go in the quiet one just out of that and think, oh, it must be decent. But you see, what happens is that the restaurant owner gets all of his cousins to come down to make the restaurant look busy, and then then he somehow puts off customers who are going to his neighbor. So that's what they're doing. They're hacking reality.
This is a real thing, by the way. In Japan, they hire people to stand in line at restaurants at lunchtime. And then people will jump, like the line will go like a block down the way while everybody else is not busy at all. It's unbelievable.
See, this is really hacking. So this is how they hack us. They know that we will make certain shortcuts because it's impossible to weigh up every piece of information. Okay, so they know we're going to take certain shortcuts. So then all the strategies are aimed at making us make the decision that they want us to make.
Right. And this is like, innocently enough, it's to sell you products on one end of the things. But then it gets diabolical. It gets to the point where they're talking about politically influencing people instead of rationally having discussions about where we should be going as a country, kind of thing.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's really to the point of they're like, right, how do we get this policy in? I mean, there's a document in the UK called Mindspace, and any of the viewers can do a internet search. And if they put Mindspace space government, that document will come up as one of the first results. And what it is that the government wrote that document based on all of the behavioral science research, and they listed the 9 best ways maybe to influence someone. And the subheading of that document is influencing behavior through public policy. Right? It's like, hang on a minute, shouldn't you just be serving the public? Okay? Because it doesn't take a genius to work out that if the people in the positions of government have a local interest to them or the department to serve special interests or big corporations over the public, then the public are going to suffer. So, for instance, if the energy companies are funding the government then you might end up with a situation where the energy prices are doubling and tripling as the elderly people are losing their winter allowance for heat, and the government thinks it's okay, which is exactly what's happening in the UK. Yeah. And then they just will sell us these lies and they say, oh, we're going to stop it going up even further. What do you mean? We're like, how can it go up even further? It's absolutely insane, the prices. But you see, this is the thing. A lot of their rhetoric is really just to placate the voters, because their influence, I mean, incentives are one of the most important things. So basically, people will, when they're incentivized to do things, and of course, then the standard theory is, oh yeah, but they will do things within the law. Well, does that hold true? So look at Wells Fargo in the US. Okay, right? The Wells Fargo set up an incentive scheme that said, and I think they did it in such a way where the bank employee would get a lot of their income from bonuses, etc., and then it would be that they would get bonuses from opening a new account for an existing customer. Okay. So what happens? 5,200 employees commit fraud. Right. So basically, what you have is that Bandera, Alfred Bandera, who was a brilliant researcher. He found that under 4 conditions, you can move up to 70% of the public's moral compass. So all you do is create the right conditions, and then you're going to see people lie, cheat, etc. For the 2/3. I mean, you learned the Milgram study. So 2/3 of people would literally push a button to electrocute someone if someone in a white coat told them to do so. The studies on banking are fascinating. So it turns out that if you get a banker to flip a coin in private and they get a bonus if it's heads and nothing if it's tails, if you don't remind them a banker, they generally won't cheat. But if you remind them that they're a banker, and it's called priming, they actually not only cheat, but they cheat more than prison inmates.
Why? Why is that?
Because the normalization within the bank industry is to cheat. It's the Wolf of Wall Street. It's the greed is good. It's dog eat dog. So what you find is that people's behavior is predominantly driven, or there's a big influence from the situation. So if you went with a bunch of mates on a weekend versus going to your nan's for dinner, you would act very differently, wouldn't you?
Okay? Oh, absolutely, yeah.
But we don't think about that, okay? So what happens is that when we're working in an environment, what happens is the environment will, in certain industries, will weed out the honest people. Okay, so what you've got in a lot of the regulation agencies and all these other things is that it's set up in such a way and rewarded in such a way that now whistleblowers are not, thanked. They're in Australia, they're put in prison.
Yeah.
So what that does is that normalizes that people are scared to speak out. And that's what you see in the last 5 years. That so basically our unconscious mind works by a very primal thing, which is move towards pleasure and away from pain. So if you make something painful, even though it's the right thing to do, a lot of people will move away from it. And then what they will do is they will give you, and sometimes it's a valid excuse. I've got a family to feed for. If I don't work, then I can't do that. And that's where they get people with the incentives and basically get people by the nuts, is that do as you say, do as you're told, or this happens.
Right. And in Canada, people are so perceptive to that. I mean, maybe under the surface, because you talk to a lot of Canadians, and generally they'll tell you, oh no, we're pretty strong people. We're strong-willed and we're defiant and all that stuff. But typically people will roll over. I mean, that's kind of the stereotype of Canadians at the end of the day, is that they're rollovers, and it happens far too often. What could be the cause of that?
Well, there's a lot of things, but it's really, if you're doing well at the current situation, people don't bite the hand that feeds them generally. There is a thing that when there's a thing where something becomes so important, when it becomes an in-gamification, which a lot of manipulation is used by this, the theory of gamification, is that once you have epic meaning or purpose, then you can't be bought. That's it. When you or this is why particularly a lot of people with strong religious or moral faiths, you know, I mean, you remember Arthur at the conference, like they tried him all different ways, but you can't. And he said, I've sold myself to God, so you can't buy me. So this is the thing. But you see, this is one of the problems with a lack of moral code, is that people can be bought. A lot of people can be bought. And really, if if the system has got a lot of those people in it, whatever it be, regulating agency or whatever, then you're not going to see people doing the right thing. You're going to see people pretending they're doing the right thing and saying they're doing the right thing. But it really, I have a real strong rule, which is judge a person by their actions. Talk cheap, talk is cheap, really.
So there's a lot of this stuff. I often try to look at the world as more chaotic than organized, because it typically is, right? Everyone has their own incentives. They have their things. You'll point to the World Economic Forum. They have a goal. They want to take over the world, whatever it is. Yeah. But that doesn't mean that everyone in the organization is on the same page. It doesn't mean that everyone in every government is on the same page. Everybody's reacting to incentives. And this is why I'm such a fan of the free market. I see it as like a bunch of different individuals making decisions and voting on what they would like or prefer to have available to them at all times. This is what you're doing when you go to the grocery store and you choose bananas instead of oranges. You're making a vote on these things. But then you have people that are trying to influence these decisions, because they're obviously trying to sell you the bananas over the oranges. So you're buying the bananas because you think that you want the bananas, but somehow you've been conditioned to want the bananas. And this is a weird thing. So so there's been so many times in my lifetime where I'm like, you know what? I really want to get a bike. I want to get a bike and I want to ride a bike. And I don't know where I got this in my head. And then I turn around and all of a sudden all my friends just bought bikes too. And I'm like, wait a second, why? What happened? Why were we all into bikes and we all believed that we independently came up with that decision all around the same time? Where does this come from?
Well, there's natural tipping points that happen where somebody just does something and it looks really cool and then it gets a buzz or whatever. So in terms of, we've actually looked in all the studies around what makes things go viral. It's very interesting. There's certain elements to it. But what's going on now is that a lot of the things that go viral are designed to go viral. They're not going viral from, a natural occurrence. And of course, a lot of the media plays a massive role in that. Now, you touched on something that's really important, is that in a free market, if all things being fair, what's really, really key is that incentives are aligned. When incentives are aligned, then you're going to see people doing good things, regardless, of their true nature, because they're incentivized to do the right thing. But for instance, you take a big pharmaceutical company now, and I asked this question to a lot of people that are trying to defend them. I said, so if a big pharmaceutical company put profits above safety, would that be a problem? Okay. And then they go,
I don't know how many people would answer that profits are better than safety. I don't know. I don't know if there would be anybody to say that.
Well, you'll get people ignore answering the question if they receive funding from the pharmaceuticals, because they know that I'm leading them down a path where they've got no defense. Right. But see, then they go, well, yeah, that's obvious. So the company you're trying to represent, do they have any criminal fines? And then you look them up and there'd be, a huge amount of them. So what you're trying to tell me is that I should trust this company that has a criminal record, that has an incentive, that has this, on what merit? So see, that's the thing about the emotional response. You pound something through propaganda, someone's going to have that emotional reaction, and then they're going to try and reason why they're having that emotional reaction, but they don't know because it's in there from an emotional perspective. Makes sense? Like, I mean, when you look at the true beautiful things in life, art and music, all these things, you can't really explain why you like something over another. And that's kind of the mystery and the beauty of a lot of it. But when it comes back to incentives, it's so key. And there's actually a book by a gentleman called Yuri Ganesi, and it's called Mixed Signals. And he's pretty much one of the world leaders as understanding incentives from behavioral science. So if you get the incentives crossed, you're going to see bad behavior, basically. That's what happens. So when, for instance, salespeople get bonuses, for selling something to someone that doesn't need it, then you're going to see that occur.
Mhm.
But the interesting thing about that is he said, in his book, I took the new medical product because I trust science. Now that's ironic because he's written a book about mixed signals and he's well aware of the mixed signals in the pharmaceutical industry, but yeah, he's going to trust them because he believes in science. Now that is a classic example of an emotional response and reason in your emotional response. Now, what you're going to see is a whole bunch of these ready, prepared, so-called reason responses to an emotional response. Now,
I know the one you're thinking. I think.
Right. So, right. I'll tell you this. Right. So,
yeah. Well, I know I had like 7 of them already, and I got the thing that I wasn't supposed to get, but it would have been so much worse if I hadn't taken it.
Now, people don't realize that that's not their idea. That has been drummed into them. Okay. Because what happens is you can't remember everything that's happened during the day. It's impossible. So, and your brain knows this. It doesn't have the storage capacity. What it does is it takes shortcuts. So you get these feelings, you get these outputs. Now, this is so key. This next little bit is so key. So what it is that we can be influenced unconsciously and not realize that's happened, and then say that as though it's ourselves. So you remember that riddle I told you? Now, that's such a classic one. We could mention that now.
Yeah.
I said to you so you obviously know the answer to this now, and it's so obvious now you know the answer. But do you remember when you're like, I don't know?
I was completely. I didn't know the answer to it.
So
let's try this with the audience because the chat's in here right now. So
there's and by the way, like, if you've already heard it, then obviously you're going to know it. But if you haven't, it's quite interesting. So there's a father and a son in a car crash. The father dies. The son's in a hospital, and in walks an old surgeon and says, "That's my son." Okay.
Yeah.
How is that possible?
How is that possible?
That's possible because the surgeon is the mother.
Okay? Yeah, I was right over my head, and I was thinking hard about that.
Yeah,
but I was conditioned to just think that a surgeon would be a man.
Here's what happens. So basically, the picture in your mind's eye, unconsciously supplying to your consciousness, has a picture as the old surgeon as a man. Okay, that's it. It's literally it's stereotyping. The stereotyping isn't a bad thing necessarily. It's how we get around in the world. It's basically saying, oh, this is generally that. So when you walk to a door that you've never seen before, you don't spend 10 minutes working out what it is. You generalize, oh, that looks like the thing I've seen. And it all happens unconsciously. And you walk up and you open the door. But what you've got is that variable was in your unconscious mind and you wasn't aware of it. You're now aware of it. Okay?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, and if I saw it visually, like a woman walking in, I wouldn't think, why is that woman a surgeon? Get back to the kitchen or something like that.
Exactly.
It's not my thoughts.
Yeah,
but it just didn't cross my mind.
Well, I've asked, like, I've had interviews with scientists and like female scientists that have been surgeons who did not get that right.
There you go.
Okay. So it's not, but everyone initially feels bad that they got it wrong. But it's not. It's all it is it's stereotyping. Is that in your unconscious mind, you create this variable, and you say this is this, and a lot of the time it's a shortcut. Okay. Now, what happens is that if there's a whole school of body of science on this, and it's called narrative transportation theory, and it's literally, and then you've got all the conditioning, which is how they can create that unconsciously. So when you look at how the news reports on certain cultures and everything else, what they're doing is if you're exposed to something so often, then it goes into the unconscious mind. And then when you're summarizing that data, that's where it's coming from. That's how a lot of prejudice gets created, by just mere exposure effect. So if you saw something happen, then every time that happened, it was, say, a cat did that, and then that thing happened next time, you think, oh, that's probably a cat.
Yeah.
Makes sense, because you're just using your experience. The problem comes is when you're not aware that experience is not accurate. Okay. Right. And that's where the media has such power, because they can make something that's not common look common, and then you'll think it's common. And this is where a lot of people's opinions are being described as being the popular opinion, or everyone thinks this way. And then what happens is a large body of people will think that way because it's the popular opinion.
Is this like Donald Trump is a racist?
Oh yeah, they will just pound that in. I mean,
yeah, I mean, like measurably, he's not racist. I mean, if you look at his actions over decades, he's measurably not that. He's not a bigot or any of these stuff. But it's just drilled in, and people just believe it.
Well, you see, I generally have a rule where I don't trust politicians, regardless, and then I judge people on their actions. But when I was talking to that person,
well, I'm not making the argument that Donald Trump's a nice guy. I'm just saying that he's
exactly
arguably not
you
that.
See, here's the key point: is that, and this is why I said that, because what happens is the minute you will question someone, they automatically assume that you support the other person if you just question why they did that. And I was having a conversation with a behavioral scientist friend of mine the other day, and someone will say something about Trump, and then she say, "Can I ask you where you come to that?" "Oh, you're a supporter," and blah blah. She goes, "No, I'm just curious why you think that." So this guy was he's posting on his Facebook that, he posted like Tesla and saying, "Oh, it's the new logo's the swastika." Okay. And then I'm posting, and I'm not defending, either of the politicians overseas. And I'm going, "But do you know what Starmer's doing? Because I know this guy is a big Starmer fan."
Right.
Oh, so you support Trump? I'm like, no. And he said, "Name one policy he's done well." Well, I can give you 7. Okay. So I literally because I know some of the policies, and obviously some of them I agree with. So I listed them out. And then his response was, "Well, I'm not going to look at those. Not even going to bother looking at those." Well, you asked me for my evidence. Where's your evidence? So what happens is that this, and it was funny because he said, "Oh, this white supremacist and all these things." And I'm like, okay, is that what the media is conditioned people to think? Because I'd seen it a few different places. So I thought, oh, that's what they must be going for. Because what it is you create these standard terms, conspiracy theorist, et cetera, and then what you do is that term is like a ready-made piece of mud to sling at someone. So then what you do is, and this is all conditioning, so then you create the bad thing, and then over years and years of conditioning, and then you put bad thing next to person, and then the person will think the two things are the same. So look at, and if you go back through TV series, you'll just see this subtly. So narrative transportation theory is really key to all of this, because it's literally the science of how to condition people to create associations. So if I said to you, why was Dirty Dancing written? Would you know? Most people wouldn't.
No, I'd only just make assumptions and then try to guess.
So the writer publicly admitted that she wrote the movie to make people more tolerant to abortion. Okay.
Whoa.
But that's the sub story. So when you look at narrative transportation theory, as an example, now all of them are bad. Like the Harvard Alcohol Project got together with ABC Studios in the 80s, and they wrote the term designated driver into Dallas and Dynasty and Cheers and all these different shows. So then that term entered the collective consciousness, and then people felt normal to say, actually, I'm driving, so I can't drink. Okay, because that's the thing. Society operates on a lot of norms. So what happens is that they will write these things in a TV series to get people to, because it's been shown that it really shifts people's opinions. So if you look back through lots of old TV series, you'll see that whenever they show a character that's a conspiracy theorist, generally they're obese, or they'll be very, low IQ. They won't be able to articulate themselves. A lot of time they're
unkempt, bad, poor hygiene, things like that.
Everything. So basically every bad characteristic about a person, the character takes. So then in the back of that person's mind, conspiracy theorist, low IQ, conspiracy theorist, low IQ. Okay. So then when something comes up and the media goes, oh, that's a conspiracy theory, they automatically think anyone that thinks that is stupid, and therefore you mustn't think that way. And that all happens outside awareness.
So it's all pre-triggered. It's set up like a elaborate Rube Goldberg machine, and it just sets off all these things in your head, and then you just come to a conclusion automatically.
Yes. So, and it's one of the most powerful things. So you look at any standard movie, they will use a series of scenes to get you to like the hero and hate the villain. and they do a very good job. So you'll literally feel, I mean, you look at the Mission Impossibles, and I can point out the scenes where there's a scene in one of them where
the guy's got a scar across his eye, or
but there's a woman, there's a
the
female. Yeah, there's a scene in where they're in France and they're breaking someone out, and then there's a female police officer, and she spots them, and then Ethan Hunt saves her life, and then he does all this really sort of protective things, and you literally can feel the warmth towards the character. Because here's what's key: you can't consciously decide that when you're seeing things. Like if you saw a burger drop into a piece of mud, like you can't decide to feel not disgusted. Like you feel disgusted, like it's automatic response. And that's where the media has so much power, but people don't realize, and in fact most people believe that they can't be influenced. And this is one of the most dangerous things, because I know I can, so I'm very careful about what I watch. And when I talk to behavioral scientists, they generally won't watch the news. If they want to find out what they're being misinformed about, they read it. Okay, because if there's like there's studies that show if there's too many tickers on the screen, you can't take the information in, so you just go into completely receptive mode. And that's where the best way to advertise to people is when they're just not sitting there thinking in it, because it's going in. And Richard Shotton wrote a book called
it's going in. Like this is something that's like this is what a lot of people don't get. And
yes.
and I probably didn't understand this quite well until you articulated it, that it doesn't matter if you don't think you saw it, you saw it.
Yes. And that's where the mind magicians, you've only got to watch, there's a brilliant video on influencers where it's called Magic for Humans. And this guy invites 3 social influencers to a meeting. And he says, I want to question you on how we can influence each other. He then gets them to go in different rooms. I'll give you the link. It's incredible. He gets them to go in different rooms in this. It's like a selfie palace or whatever. There's 20 different rooms, 50 different items. And they go into a room with an item, take a selfie. At the end of it, they've all taken the same selfie in the same room with the same tagline.
Yes.
Okay. Now, how does that work? So,
how does that work?
Yeah, you're at a party, okay, and there's half a dozen conversations going on around you, okay, and then the minute someone mentions your name, what happens?
Oh, you look up and
you notice, okay. Now, what does that assume?
What does that assume? That somebody wants your attention, or somebody
but think
needs
about
you for something?
What it must assume about your brain?
Right, I don't know where you're going with that.
Yeah, well, this is where it's interesting, because it's only because people can't answer that question. And this is what it is. When you know something, it's obvious. But when you don't know it, you don't. This is known as the curse of knowledge, by the way. So if your brain is informing you when it hears your name, it must be recording all of those conversations. It must be listening to all of them. Because the minute your name's mentioned, see what's going on. There's a part of the brain called the reticular activating system. Let's call it the RAS for short. Now it's the security guard at the front door. Okay. And it's basically filtering all the information. And the minute your name gets mentioned, it flags it. And it says, right, Marty, conscious mind, someone's mentioned your name. Clyde, someone's mentioned your name. And then you notice. So basically what's going on, that is an example of what the security guard at the door is. It's got its filters. Right? It's got a list of information to let in and information to let out. So the media conditions that unconscious part of the mind to not let in these people, these pieces of information, and let in these pieces. And that's why 2 people can live
it's educating your security guard.
Yes.
That's what it's doing.
The security guard is the gatekeeper. It is probably one of the most important things for everyone to know, because if you've got the RAS set up, for instance, for poverty, that's all you're going to see. So basically, it reflects your belief system. So if you keep having the same events happen to you, you keep trying to solve them, but going round and round and round. I had this massively in a few things, and I managed to change it. I can give you a few examples. But basically, what's going on is that RAS is key, because it's literally filtering in and out. Now, what happens is that certain information will bypass that. Okay, so what's going on is that the unconscious mind is absorbing all the information. Then the security guard is filtering what your conscious mind needs to know about. but all the other information's getting into the club.
Yes.
So what happens is, so let me tell you one of the studies, and it will illuminate what happens. So they created this puzzle in a room, and the solution to the puzzle, there was 2 ropes, and the solution was to swing one of the ropes closer to the other and then solve the puzzle. Now, only 30% of people solved it. But what they did then, they gave an unconscious clue. So one of the study designers walked into the room and brushed against the rope. Okay. Mm-hmm. Now, and this is what Archimedes, when he goes Eureka. So the story is he's sitting in the bath and then the water rises and then he goes, oh, I've got it. So what happens is a lot of the time when you get those aha moments, something has happened in your environment to give you the piece of missing information that your unconscious mind will then put the pieces together and go, aha. That hasn't been unconsciously, but that doesn't take away the fact that your brain has solved it. So people want to consciously do things, but it's not easy. Unconsciously doing things is the way. So Wayne Gretzky, for instance, you know how they used to train him. His father used to train him to imagine where all the other players would be moving. So they'd done that so many times that it was second nature to him to guess where people would be. So it was repetition, repetition, repetition. So with that rope study, when the guy knocked the rope, another 30% of people solved the puzzle, but they didn't know why.
Right.
They couldn't articulate why. So what they have it is that in a supermarket, if they did these studies where they had French and German wine, and then one day they played French music and one day they played German music. And then what happened was that on the day of the French music, 76% of people bought the French wine. And on the German music day, it's almost the same. Now, when those people were asked on leaving, did the music have any effect? 95% of them said no.
Because it's all subconscious.
Yes, that way it's all subliminal, so it's below conscious awareness. So if you can pound information into someone's mind, okay, you can then, to a large degree, predict what opinion they're gonna have. Because people say to me, why do I know what's going on? Because you expose yourself to better quality information, and that's what it is. So I'm of the opinion that we don't consciously decide, we don't come to our conclusions consciously. They're a result of all the processing of information. So if you put better information into the system, you're going to have better conclusions. It's just common sense. So the people that spotted something was wrong over the last 5 years, what happened is that they had for the most part, they had a contradiction that was so big that it alerted the RAS, the security guard at the door. So then the security guard goes doors, says, hang on a minute, I've got to let some other information in here. And then the person would actively go looking for it. And then once that RAS is changed, they start seeing all the information that they previously ignored. For instance, have you ever had that experience where you buy a car like you've never purchased before, and then suddenly you see that car everywhere?
Okay. Yeah, it's not just cars, it's everything.
Anything. That's the RAS. So now the security guard is going, oh, I'm going to keep a lookout for this.
Right. I got that. I got that last summer. I bought a Hawaiian shirt and I was like, I never wear Hawaiian shirts. I'm going to get one. I never see these things. And then I saw everybody that's wearing them. But now, obviously everyone has always been wearing them. I just didn't notice.
Exactly that. You didn't notice. So what's going on is that if you have two different people, so the RAS is really the filter system. So if you have two different people that come from two different political parties, they're going to see every event from a different perspective.
Right.
And that's how you can have...
That's incredible.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
You could literally have two people living in the same house, living two different realities because they're looking at everything differently. If they're watching two different media channels, they're getting a different form of conditioning if those two different media channels have different people funding the programs or different ideologies or whatever it is.
So what's a way to actually reach people that are on the other side? And for one, immediately as soon as you say that, I try to look introspectively. I'm like, yeah, what is it that I'm blinded by? And I'm, am I somehow wrong? Maybe I should reassess my whole situation. But then also, like, how do you have a conversation with people? Because we all know that, especially when it comes to politics and religion, as soon as you challenge somebody on it, they dig their heels in, and then that's it. Yeah, there's no talking with them.
Yeah, so we've got a general rule is that your 3 tools for good critical thinking to get the other person to see a point are questions, stories, and metaphors. Unless you use those, they are very unlikely to change their position. But then there's the way I talk about it is that you're looking to get them to a rational perspective and to assess something as you would yourself. The first thing is, when you come with conclusions and thoughts, double check them. Okay. And then just objectively, because we're running a series of workshops on this, and we're going to build some checklists. So you basically you objectively, so I use checklists a lot, because when I send out an email for our group, because we do these free Zooms, and if I don't use the checklist, I will forget something. Okay. So I might forget the date, I might forget the Zoom or whatever. I'm not very efficient in that area. So I use a checklist. So the checklist guarantees that I'm going to have the information that I need to have in there. So basically, we have a checklist for critical thinking. And once you've done it enough times, then you will critically think. So basically, if I have a thought and then I go, right, is that really true? And then I can verify it with that checklist. So you're objectively checking your own thoughts. Because, for instance, when I work with a lot of clients on belief systems, because there's some incredible processes and techniques now that if someone wants to change a belief system that's not serving them, we can do so. So you might have a belief that will come up that someone says, oh, I don't feel good enough. And one of the things will be the imposter syndrome. Then the imposter syndrome is where the person knows they're good, but unconsciously they feel that they're not. And all that's happened is they've had some very early experiences where maybe their father was very a perfectionist and criticized everything they did. Okay, so then they develop a belief, I'm not good enough. And then what they may develop is a survival strategy that if I succeed, then I'll be good enough. Okay, so then they hyper succeed in a lot of instances, but they never feel successful. There's always that bit underneath because it's sitting on top of the other belief. That makes sense? So then the question is, if they feel I'm not good enough, what we say is, well, is that true? How do you know that's true? So then what we do is we find the sources of it, and then we question the source, and we give alternate interpretations, and then what happens is the belief weakens, and then we can reframe it so then they don't believe that anymore. But you can't just decide to go, well, I'm going to decide to feel good enough. And this is the problem with the positive movement, that it's, positive vibes only. Well, that's impossible. Like, wasn't
that the secret that I remember there's
well, that's subtly different. Now, those things,
okay. I never read it. I heard about it. And it was like positive vibes all the time.
Yeah, it's subtly different. But a lot of the time, people, if you do it on the surface, I'm just saying, oh, I'm going to look in the mirror and say I'm a millionaire. If your mind goes, no, you're not, then that's not going to work. So what it is, it's getting, so basically there's 3 elements of mind. I give you a very simple metaphor that will really allow people to see, very simple metaphor to allow how we act and how we think about things. So you've got 3 things. You've got the conscious mind, it's the rider. The unconscious mind is the horse. And then they've got a map, like a computer. Okay. Now, if the map says mass work, okay, the horse is going to move towards a mask. Okay. And then the rational mind is going to try and reason. So if you've ever tried reasoning with someone that wears a mask, the studies show they don't work, you're not going to get anywhere because it's emotional response. Okay.
Yeah. Right.
Now, if in the map it says money is bad or it's the root of all evil, the horse is going to move away from money. The rider is going to try and force the horse to move, but your unconscious mind controls behavior. So the horse in this analogy is the unconscious, it controls behavior. So if someone goes to put their hand in a fire, the hand's going to automatically pull back. It knows it's painful. So the horse moves towards pleasure and away from pain. So in the conditioning, all they have to do is condition the horse to move towards something. And then the conscious mind is going to try and reason why that's happening. Okay. Right. And if you noticed, the ability of people, particularly the educated ones, to rationalize their behavior is unbelievable. The mental gymnastics that they can do around a logical point. So trying to reason with someone that's coming from an emotional position does not work. So what you've got to do is you've got to connect to them. Now, first thing you've got to do in a conversation is make sure that if they've got a caricature of you, that you break that. Okay, because they're gonna orientate themselves to the caricature, not you.
So how do you
Right?
do that? Is there a technique to breaking that?
Yeah,
caricature?
there's a lot of things. Basically, it's a series of bits of knowledge that you need, and then you need to train yourself to do it. So, as an example, I accompanied the lawyers to a center of something that was happening, and then some guy comes up and he goes, "Oh, you're just a bunch of conspiracy theorists." I said, "Excuse me, sir, can I have a chat with you?" And I said, "Look, I can see you're very emotional about this, but I'll be respectful. I know you'll be the same." Now that's setting the scene, right? So you basically just be very open about how you're going to act, and you give the person respect, and a lot of the time you'll just get it back. Okay, disrespect is one of the worst things that goes on in conversation, and
Because then it's reciprocal, right? Like that,
exactly.
then they'll just shut down, and you won't get a conversation.
And then I said to him, "But can I point out before we talk about anything that we're on the same side?" Okay, and he said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, I'm here because I care about my friend and my family and my community, and I'm assuming that's why you're here." And he says, "Yes." I said, "We may differ on the ideas, but our intention is the same." Now that changed the whole energy. He's God just come. He just changed his whole body language. Now, and we call this being in someone's corner, not stepping in the ring. But the key is that you can't pretend to do it. Okay, you can't just do it because you're trying to manipulate them. You've really got to find a way to realize that this person has been completely misled, misinformed, and that's why they're acting like an asshole. If you can find a way to get over that emotion and then connect with them, then you can shift them really quickly. I've had people where I've only had 3 or 4 sentences with them, and then I've seen them a month later and they've gone, "Oh my God, they're lying about everything." Because I was able to,
it set a trigger off, and wow, they went and did a bunch of reading.
Because what it is, there's a thing called privileged moments. Now, privileged moment is getting someone so open to assessing a piece of information that you're sharing that when you can deliver that, it's literally like a bomb into the knowledge. Okay.
Wow.
Now that's what I did with this gentleman. I literally only said 2 or 3 things, and it literally jarred him. So his Raz went, that security guard at the door goes, "Hang on a minute." He goes off, he tore down his whole belief system in a month or 2.
That's crazy.
On his own accord. Because what it is, the most important thing is you've got to get someone to take one step. And sometimes that's the only thing you need to get them to do. Because coming back to the questions.
Well, I was going to ask too, is there any note on shibboleths in this whole thing? Because I've said on shibboleths, like a phrase or term that identifies you to a group. So, for example, if you start saying like words, if somebody said a word to you like anti-conformist, you would kind of like, oh, I kind of get what group you're in. You're probably in like a neo-socialist group, that kind of thing. If somebody's defending capitalism, you're like, okay, he's one of those conservative guys. So I've encouraged people to when you're talking to somebody on the other side, instead of using these shibboleths that you would have, that they would label you in the enemy territory, to talk to them more on their terms, that kind of thing. So
it's really
instead of saying capitalism, I'll say the market economy, and it kind of diffuses thing a little bit.
Yeah, well, I'd never heard that. So that's interesting. We call it buzzwords. So basically, so they use it, and of course, what it is, it's identifying. So of course, you'll have that. Oh, you're one of those, are you?
Exactly.
So what we've inadvertently done is we've used the linguistics of the group that we either identify with or they identify as being in. The media has said if this person does this, they're that. So it's kind of this if-then thing. Now, the key thing, which is that story I said about that gentleman, is once you break that caricature, that's key. So in the Robbers Cave experiment, where Tajfel was working out what creates this, the group splitting, it's identity. Sorry, it's creating the label, identifying with the label, and then comparing the groups. Now, what happened was that the study would never be allowed to be done now because of ethics, but they in a summer camp, they had a load of children. They split them into 2 different groups. They created a little bit of rivalry, and then the group started burning each other's flags and attacking each other's home. And right, it got so bad that they started to get worried they might have damaged these kids. Now, that was the way to create, two groups that fight each other. But there was a solution. There's a remedy. There's an antidote. And what it is, you get two people to solve a problem together. So what happens is that they manufactured an event where the truck broke down, and then all the children had to work together to solve it. So then what happens is that they now see themselves as the same group. So the key thing is you've got to find common ground. So what I say to people is say, look, I care for humanity, etc. If you share those same values, we're in the same group. Okay. Mm-hmm. Now, it's better to show it than say it. So you demonstrate it, because show don't tell is massively important to hold of this thing. You'll never really influence anyone by telling them anything. You've got to influence them by showing them. And that's why stories and metaphors are very powerful. But just quickly, and you'll probably start to see there's so much to this, but it really is how you eat an elephant, bit by bit. How you learned to drive was each time just learning one thing, getting good at it, and then you put it all together. And this work is similar to that. You've got to learn things piece by piece, and then in the end you can drive, and then in the end you become an advanced driver because you're practicing. So take one example, questions. That generally most people see questions as just one subject, okay? So imagine that there's a big red button on the person you're talking to, and every question presses that red button. But that's not how it works. There's almost like 20 different buttons. Okay. And 10 of those buttons are good and 10 of those buttons are bad. And if you press one of the bad buttons, you're going to get a bad response. You press one of the good ones, you're going to get a good response. So it's to know the distinction between the good and the bad questions. So if we go to that illusionary thing, that the person's under the illusion that they know what they're talking about. And this is important because we ran a project during the last 5 years where we took every subject and we tried to produce that subject in a nutshell. So we wrote a single page document summarizing the study, the points, and some key areas. And then when we started to write them, we realized a lot of them we didn't know as much as we thought we knew. Okay, so there's always this false sense of security. So so when and this is why they say if you want to know how much you know something, try and teach it to someone. So if you want to, so we've put on the course that we got on the website is this document and how it's structured. And what happens is, if you build this document for a subject, you'll then get an indication whether you know that subject. And what's interesting is that when we built those documents around all the different narratives and then shared them, they got no pushback. And they got shared a lot of the time because it opens in a very gentle way. It then states 3 really key points and then states a conclusion, which people couldn't combat because it had the back-end evidence. When you just make a conclusion, most of the time people are going to say, no, that's rubbish, because they've got different foundations to that conclusion. That makes sense? So a tip is to never give someone a conclusion, give them the foundation, and they will come to that conclusion. So coming back to the questions, if you believe someone's in an illusionary position on a subject, here's 2 examples of questions, and I'll tell you a study that they did to show this. Is that they went up to a group of, whether it be Labour or Conservative. That's so. What's yours? Liberals. What's your other main party that you?
The Conservatives, and then there's the NDP.
Yeah. So you got the. So they would go up to one of those groups, and they would say, "By the way, I consult to so many different countries to trying to keep a track of all these things is not easy, right?"
No, I believe you.
So they went up to one of the groups and they says, right, why do you support the party you support? Okay. What does the person do? They reason their emotional response. So they gave them a list of why. And then they said to them, can we donate to that party on your behalf? They went, yes, that would be great. Okay. So all they've done is they've got the person to believe what they believe even more. So asking them the why question, you want to get them to solidify their position and justify it and strengthen it. So it's literally the worst question you can ask in that situation. The why question is a very powerful question, but not in that situation when they're illusionary about what they're talking about. But if you said to them, can you explain? Well, that's what they did. They went up to them. They said, oh, which party do you support? Oh, can you explain the policies of that party? What happens? The person suddenly realized they don't know, because most people don't know. most people are voting for the jersey.
Yeah,
Right?
that's exactly it.
The color of the tie, whatever they've inherited. Most religions is what people have been given. Not many people change. In fact, people change their sports team less than anything else. So it becomes embedded. So it's quite profound. So when they said to them, can you explain the policy? They didn't know. And they said, oh, can we donate on your behalf? And they said, actually, no.
I gotta think about that. Give me a sec.
Exactly. They said, I need to think about it. So what you've done with that question is you've highlighted the contradiction for them. And sometimes that is enough to start to jar the system. And if you've got a good relationship and you've got a good conversation and you're being respectful is probably the most important thing, not making someone look silly, all those things, you're inviting them to step in and observe their own belief system, and then they will tear it down in some cases. Now, there's a very interesting, there was a funny joke around Seinfeld where he's gone to this baseball game. Guys hit a home run and he stood up and he started cheering. And the other guy said, what are you doing? Sit down. He goes, well, last time we were cheering for that guy. He says, yes, but we've now traded him. Goes,
he's on the other team.
You're cheering for the jersey, not the person.
Yeah.
You see, so basically it's to distinguish the two. That's why if you push against an identity, you really generally don't get anywhere. But if you can get the person to disassociate from the identity, because think about it, when people join cults or gangs or whatever, they adjust their behavior to the gang or the cult. So the identity is driving the behavior. Now, here's one massively important tip. And I couldn't resolve this because the studies were basically contradicting each other. But it turns out they're both right. Your beliefs and your identity will drive your behavior. But if you start to do something different, your belief systems will change. Okay? So if you can get someone to do one thing, whether it be critically think, objectively do something, they will start to shift their belief system as someone that does that, and then they can tear down their whole system. Now, what they found is that you look at during the last 5 years, that's how they got people to move from being quite sensible to literally, having certain fascist ideas. So step by step, and it's called self-perception theory. If you can get someone to do so, all they did was get someone to do one thing, belief system moved. One thing, belief system moved. One thing, belief system moved.
Wow.
See? So that's what they did. So they got them to,
and you can do it the other way as well. I mean, like
exactly.
I've heard so many stories from people in the gun community. They'll take somebody shooting that's never shot before and was anti-gun, wanted gun control, and they go shooting, and then they're like, oh, I kind of like this. Yeah, and I'm kind of glad I have a right to do that. That kind of.
I've seen it in my own behavior. So I studied this course to understand belief systems and learn how to change them. Mm-hmm. Now, I spent 6,000 going through these 3 different courses. Now, it's all homework and a few Zoom calls. Now, when I looked at how much homework I'd got on in time or actually finished, it was 10%. Now, that's it. Now, what I'm going to do there, if I'm not careful, is I'm going to rationalize. So I'm going to go, oh, well, I'm a busy person. Blah. So I'm going to come up with loads of reasons to make myself feel better. But if I can not bullshit myself, and as Richard Feynman said, the first principle is to not fool yourself, and you're the easiest one to fool. So I said, right, is that really a valid excuse? Well, no, I work from home. I can find, if I'm doing something half hour to an hour a day that's leisurely, then I could, and obviously it's important to relax. So what I did was, but the realization was that all that was going on is that I had an unconscious feeling that I didn't enjoy doing homework, and that came from school. So all I did was I used a series of exercises, and we put an article on the website describing this. And I literally, the only thing I did was this. I imagined doing the homework, and then I celebrated. I imagined doing the homework, and then I celebrated. I imagined doing that. So what I'm doing is I'm conditioning my horse to associate pleasure to the task. And this is how advertising works. Boom, 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 boom. So now I've done the courses again, and I've got 100% for all the homework. Okay? Because what's going on is that you will move towards pleasure away from pain. If you can condition your unconscious mind to associate pleasure to the things you want to do, then you can, in a lot of instances, depending if there's not too many emotional attachments and other things going on, that can be enough to do that. And that's what they did for me, because there wasn't any other real reasons not to, because I wanted to do it. I'd paid all the money. But the key thing is not to bullshit ourselves.
Wow,
that's the real key piece.
Yeah. Okay. So here's a funny thing. It's not about emotions. Ever since I went to college, I had to drive early in the morning to school. And it was a really long drive in the dark and a switchback mountain highway. And now every time I get behind the wheel, I just feel sleepy. Is that what that's happening?
Yeah, you're responding automatically. Now, if you can break those
especially if it's dark and I'm sleeping and I'm driving, I'm just like, time to crash. Like,
yeah. Well, this is the thing. We would do a lot of the time. Well, there's a bunch of studies on this. It's called priming. Wow. Now, some of these studies are literally unbelievable, but they've replicated them time and time again. They would have somebody answer some questions. And if they primed them with words to be elderly words that you would associate with elderly people, when they left the building, the ones with elderly words left slower. Right? You are literally accessing the mental map in your mind of that concept, and then your behavior reflects it. So this is why the priming in the advertising is so powerful. So here's another key point. If you elicit a short-term goal, but you keep eliciting it, and that goal is away from long-term goals or values, that person can move away from that. Basically, if you scare the shit out of someone every day, okay, then they can be moving towards something that they don't want to go towards, but they're just stuck in that crisis mode. And that's what you'll see a lot of people in. They're not able to really do what they want to do because everything is just about so you can't, in the UK now, you can't even walk in a supermarket without them saying, oh, we're keeping you safe. Like, no, like, I don't want you to do it. That's my job. Okay. Now, This is what's fascinating. But all the viewers that have seen through this and seen that something's up in the propaganda, they really need to pat themselves on the back, because that's key to appreciate what you've done. Mm-hmm. And to realize that if you haven't got through to someone, it's not because they can't be reached. Okay, it's because there's a $1 trillion like head job been done on them. Yeah, and if you haven't studied the subject, you can't expect to be good at it. Mm-hmm. Makes sense. So I think having that thing where we don't judge ourselves for something that we haven't, because people go to me, I've tried everything, and I can understand that, because it feels like you have. Okay, and the person's being so irrational and unreasonable. But we've been educated to see ourselves and work in a way that we don't actually work that way. Okay, so we've not been given the manual for how we work. Makes sense. And that's where, when I circle back to where we opened with, the behavioral science has got so many answers to what's going on, and then what we've done is we've broken all those down to the component pieces, put them together to see the picture. So what behavioral science has done over the last couple of decades is it's made startling discoveries about how we work. Mm-hmm. That has not been given to the public. You've not seen any big, oh, look, we've worked out, boom, here you are. You can, look after yourself better. It's been used to sell us stuff we don't need, condition us to think thoughts that aren't true, such as, men can have babies and all these kind of ludicrous things, right? Yeah. So because we are vulnerable, we've got, if you think about a computer, we've got, there's firewalls and virus protections and all these things. When a thought makes it in past the RAS that isn't, past that security guard that shouldn't be in there, then that's going to cause havoc in the system.
Well, and there's things that people are afraid of, because you see stuff like I'll just pop this video up on the screen. So this is Klaus Schwab, the leader of the World Economic Forum, discussing the future of politics with the former CEO of Google.
So if you wanted to design a Bond villain, how would you have him look?
This is the guy. This is the guy, obviously, the accent and everything. But listen to what he has to say here.
So technology now is, and digital technologies mainly have an analytical power. Now we go into a predictive power, and we have seen the first examples, and your company very much involved into it. But then the next step could be to go into a prescriptive mode, which means you do not even have to have elections anymore, because you can already predict, and afterwards you can say, why do we need elections? Because we know what the result will be. Can you imagine such a world?
Yeah, can you imagine such a world where they're not only predictive, but if they're manipulating the people, we're already there. Because
have you seen Robert Epstein's work on this? He's shown that Google can flip 20 million votes.
Wow.
Okay, I'd advise he's a genius. The work he's done, and he's a Democrat, and he's basically calling the Democrats out because they're using all of this. So if you type, funny enough, if you type into Google election interference, they won't show you any results. They won't. They literally, right? So this is what's key, that as a rule, we generally don't look outside of our environment for information. This is why people think, well, if that was true, it'd be on the news. Because most people's thing is, if it's not on this screen, then it is not true. And that's problematic, because people don't go the extra mile. And I'm pretty sure that a lot of your viewers do. And that's why they're going to be better informed. Because the truth, I think it was Denzel Washington said, if you don't watch the news, you're uninformed. But if you do, you're misinformed.
You're misinformed.
I'd rather be uninformed than misinformed, because at least then I know that I don't know something, and then I can ask someone.
David, would you believe me if I told you we've gone over the time? That's every time we chat, it's the same thing. Now I want to make sure everybody knows where they can get a hold of you, where they can reach you, if they have questions or any of that stuff. This one's always a hard one for me to remember, because I just remember your name.
Yes.
But your Twitter profile is Reaching People, and that's at People Reaching. So if you have any inquiries or anything like that, go there. But then there's also the website, and that's reachingpeople.net, where there's a plethora of information. Go check it out. There's so much on here. A whole write-up on David and a number of other people that you're working with, correct?
Yeah, if you click on interviews. Now, one of the other things as well, I mean, I don't get onto social media as much as I'd want to. Now, we've got another sort of 20 or so interviews that are not loaded up here yet. But if you go to the YouTube channel, we're basically suffering for resources. Because the project, I literally sold my house to fund the project because it was key. But so we don't have many resources, but we're trying to use them as efficiently as we can. So what we've got is we've got an uncommon series of workshops with Dr. David Funder, who's a political scientist and a philosopher, and Sinead Stringer, who's a behavioral scientist. And we're going to, in that, so David has written a book about how communities can get strong because they're being pushed from top down, but we need to be ground up. And we're going to show critical thinking elements, etc. Because the trap that a lot of people will make is they say they're a critical thinker, and a lot of people will do it intuitively. But when you can build that checklist, you can know how to articulate it then to the other person. And then when you're debating them, because the truth is most of the pro-narrative professors, etc., on X can articulate why they believe what they believe, even though their beliefs a lot of the time are nonsense. But because they can articulate it, people get a bit worried, and then obviously they don't want to challenge. Someone said to me the other day, how do you have the audacity to challenge a medical doctor? I was like, well, because I've studied every bias known to man. I know that he's not thinking clearly. So this is what's interesting. But yeah, we're trying to get this out. But if I give a few tips, when you're talking to people, share stories, ask questions, use metaphors. So as an example, I was on there's Panda, who a collection of scientists and academics.
Isn't that the what would Jesus do mantra? I mean, like all the gospels are parables and stories.
Well, why are they so powerful? It's so powerful. Yeah. So I was just a quick story to show. Well, in fact, let me do two final things. I was on a call with Panda, and one of the scientists that spoke out gave a 2-hour presentation. It was phenomenal. But 2 days later, I could not remember a single thing she said because it was all cerebral, it was data, it was facts. You can't retain that in long-term memory. A gentleman called Marc Giraudot, who's a French businessman, he said one thing, and I can still tell you today what he said because he used a metaphor.
Right.
And he said that product cannot work because it's like in a snow resort, they've put the avalanche barriers in the town.
Okay.
Now, I can picture that and I can make sense of it because it relates to the term that it's not in a place where it can do anything. Like tits on a ball, it can't work, you know? So basically, that's why that was so powerful. And even today, I can still tell you what he said and what it meant. Now, there's a thing called deep canvassing, which, by the way, they've put people into fMRI machines, which measure brain activity. They can search and find out what brain regions work in, whatever. So what they've done is they've studied people to the nth degree to know what works and what doesn't work. So they have a complete list of how to talk to you and a way to influence you. Now, one of the techniques is called deep canvassing, where they literally go around, knock on someone's door, they speak to them for 15 or 20 minutes, and they can change their political views in that space of time. Now, and it's not being used ethically, in my opinion, but it can be, because as long as you share the truth, okay, and you're doing it in a balanced way. But they noticed that when, and the deep canvassing script involves a story. When they took the story out, it stopped working.
Really?
It doesn't work without
that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense.
And Plato said, Plato said, those that tell the stories rule society.
Wow. Wow, that's amazing. Well, we all know the story of Homer's Odyssey. That's like the oldest tale, and I think that we know of. It goes way back, and it's been told in so many different ways, and it's a classic. But everybody can relate to it, so that's amazing.
Think about this. Well, Lisa Cron wrote a book called Wired for Story. So imagine the earliest men and women and children. How would they learn? They would learn from doing things. So they'd get burned, and they'd right. But that seems quite a painful way of learning.
Yeah.
Okay. That's where stories come in. Stories is how you can teach another person a piece of information without having them to experience it themselves and doing it the hard way. Problem is that if those stories are not truthful and they don't have strong moral codes in them, and that's why Aesop's fables and all the stories, that's how communities and civilizations passed on knowledge from one generation to the next. Okay. And what do we have as our role models now? I mean, 500 years ago, it would be like, Archimedes and all the Plato and all that would be. Now it's like some singer that's going to be around for a year. Like, you know what I mean?
Taylor Swift. Yeah, unbelievable. So yeah, the website again for everybody, so you can head on over there, is Reaching People. Get on over there. The plethora of information, knowledge. It's absolutely fantastic. I can't recommend it enough. And I'm gonna have you back on the show again, obviously. But then what we're gonna do here is we'll get into the Q&A portion of the live stream. For those of you that are watching this after the fact, the Q&A is available on the on the previous streams. So go check that out. This is part of a longer conversation that took place on the Clyde Do Something YouTube channel. If you're not subscribed there, make sure you are. But a lot of these longer form conversations are going to be moving over to the Do Something podcast. That's right. We're moving a lot of that kind of stuff over there. A lot of the shorter videos are going to stay on Clyde Do Something, while we're going to be moving forward with some collaborative efforts along with Jasmine Lane, Ryan Hemsley, and many others. So make sure that you're subscribed to the Do Something podcast and hit that notification bell so you can find out when we're live. We'll see you in the next one. Keep on trucking.